What's your philosophy right now on the state of the Western economy? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Like just overall from 30,000 feet.
Well, fundamentally, it's in very bad shape, and it's very similar to a heroin addict in the sense that if you give the heroin addict enough heroin, sure they can function. They might be able to walk around, they might be able to go to the grocery store, but underneath the skin, they're incredibly unhealthy and maybe very near death. And so it's all about that heroin, and we've gotten to the same point, especially in the United States, with first quantitative easing, and then with this government, these government deficits that they've now, $5 trillion for heaven's sakes in 2020 alone.
What instrument in the economy would be the heroin? Because I mean, we know the addict is the U.S., right? But what is the actual instrument?
The dollars they're creating out of thin air,
printing out dollars.
You want to say monetary heroin? It's cheap money. It's them sending out stimulus checks to everyone for staying at home and not going to work. This is a monetary drug, whether you want to call it UBI, a welfare state. It's more and more government fiscal spending.
How much are they pumping out monthly to an individual in the U.S. right now?
Oh, it depends on which individuals you're referring to, but I mean, every single month it's something else, Rich. They just came out with a child tax credit, which is a
We've had that here for a long time. They probably ripped that off our system.
Yeah, but it's not a tax. I mean, they say it's a tax credit, but they're just sending people checks directly in the mail. Here in the United States, the average income is up almost 20% from where it was in 2019. This was going back to January, February of this year. So you say, how on earth can that be when the economy was locked down, when you have way higher unemployment, you have a lot of people that just refuse to go back to work. So how is that even possible? Well, it's possible when the government just continues to send people stimulus checks or increase their unemployment benefits or give them these child tax deductions. And then also too, on the expense side of the equation, here we had a rent or an eviction moratorium where you couldn't kick people out. The landlords couldn't kick people out for not paying rent. So you had a lot of people that just said, screw it, I'm not going to pay rent.
So you had landlords carrying the burden of running that home while they had a tenant in it, like basically a squatter, not paying rent, and they couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, and then a lot of them had wouldn't have to pay their mortgage because we had a mortgage forbearance here as well.
So so that moved on to the homeowners too.
Some of them, if you had a loan with Fannie and Freddie, there are some stipulations there, but you've got the government coming in and creating all of these economic distortions. And what your viewers who might not have, might not be as nerdy as I am when it comes to economics, the thing you just have to understand is that wealth is not a measurement of dollars or of currency. That doesn't matter at all. What wealth is goods and services. It's a society's ability to create goods and services. And if you want an extreme example, just go out to a deserted island with a chest full of $1 million, let's say. How rich are you? You're dirt poor because there's no goods and services, right?
You've got kindling, basically. You have something to start fires with.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much cash you have. In that sense, it wouldn't matter how much gold or Bitcoin or anything you have. There's no goods and services, for heaven's sakes, right? So when you look at this government, the distortions that they're creating through this deficit spending, you just have to ask yourself the question, okay, is this going to create more goods and services in the future or fewer goods and services? And if it creates fewer goods and services, then by definition, we as a society are becoming more poor. And I mean, let's look at our example, or let's use the two of us, right? My guess is your investment portfolio is larger today as far as the nominal value than it was in 2019.
Of course, yeah.
For me, my investment portfolio is substantially larger. But then you have to ask the question, are you richer today or are you poorer? So let's say this another way. Rich Cooper, do you have access right now in Canada to more goods and services than you did in 2019, or fewer goods and services? Do you have more personal freedom today or less personal freedom
Less
today?
freedom today. Definitely less freedom.
That's right. And then you have access to fewer goods. My guess is it's like here in the United States, it's far harder to get a reservation at a restaurant. You used to be able to get an Uber in 2 minutes. Now it takes you 20 minutes if you can even get one. That's if you're lucky. Try getting a rental car. They're just sold out everywhere. There's far fewer goods and services. Therefore, even if your portfolio is significantly higher, even if we're getting more income, it doesn't matter. We're just getting these green pieces of paper. At the end of the day, it's about society producing goods and services. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and this is a guy I like a lot. His name is Simon Black. He's got a company called sovereignman.com, just to give him a shout out. But he was talking to this gal that grew up in Soviet Russia, right? And she made a very interesting point that I think kind of goes over a lot of our heads that grew up in the Western world, because we see, Russia, or back in the 70s and 80s, as being very poor. That was a poor country, But she said that everyone had money. Like, that wasn't the issue. Everybody had money, but there was just no stuff to buy. So you sit there and you see a line, you have to wait in line for 5 hours to get a loaf of bread. And in the US, we associate that with not having enough money. But no, that's not the problem. The problem is there's no goods and services. You see, and that's what the United States is doing right now by not only quantitative easing, but especially they've kicked it into overdrive with this deficit spending that just has gone completely parabolic in 2020, and they'll have to continue to maintain that level, because it's like the heroin. Once you start taking that level of heroin, you got to take more and more and more to have the same effect. But
So what does the end look like?
What's that?
What does the end look like? Like how does this end? Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I mean,
because being a heroin addict is not a solution to life, right? Like, that ends at some point, usually quite badly.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it's going to end for the U.S. economy. So you have to have a deleveraging, just like the heroin addict has to get off the drug. But that time where they go through the withdrawals is very, very difficult, and it's extremely painful. But
what do you recommend guys do today to sort of prepare for that? Like, is it hedging with real estate, gold, Bitcoin?
Well, that's a very broad question. I think that you've got to buy correctly. You've got to buy things when they're cheap. You've got to sell them when they're expensive. But I think that the things that just the everyday person can do is make sure you've got some gold. And I like to do what I call a 10-80-10 portfolio. So 10% in gold, 80% in assets that pay me to own them, and then 10% in just speculations where I think there's good asymmetry there. Bitcoin would be an example of that, and rental property would be a good example of something that pays me to own it. But the problem right now is you can't just say, well, rental property, because people go out there and buy it in California or Toronto, as an example, and they probably have a negative carry on it.
Well, I have a rental property in Toronto that I've had for, I don't know, since 2014 or something like that.
So do you have positive cash flow?
I do, because I don't owe much on it. But the rents have come down from like $2,950, maybe $3,000 a few years ago to about $2,600. And the value of the property, it's not moved much. I mean, it's pretty static. If anything, with inflation, it's probably a losing bet right now as far as value, but that might change in a few years. I mean, people are moving out of cities, right? That's why there's so many vacancies.
Yeah, well, here rents are going up pretty much everywhere. But see, that's a good example of.
Where do you live? You're in Arizona, right?
Yeah, I'm in Arizona right now. I mean, who knows where I'll be in 6 months? But I think it's a matter of the deal, and the numbers, and it's not just a blanket statement. Now, back in 2012, you could have said, yeah, just buy real estate. It's cheap.
Mhm.
Today, you can't do that. And you have to understand how to utilize debt, because in the United States, as an example, that's really your asset when you're buying real estate. Now, it shouldn't be, but unfortunately it is. The debt, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is your asset, because if we get substantial inflation, which I think we will long term, then you're going to be paying that loan back with devalued dollars. And if you're paying the loan back with devalued dollars, that's a transfer of wealth, purchasing power from the lender to the borrower. And so I think right now it's the complete opposite that it usually is. Most of the time in a healthy market, the property would be the asset and the mortgage would be the liability. But I think it's flopped to where now the liability is the property, because you're buying at all-time highs, but the asset is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That's where you're going to make your purchasing power that will compensate you from probably your loss of purchasing power that you'll have with the property. And people forget that you can lose purchasing power in real terms, but increase in nominal terms. So as an example, and very few people, especially real estate, because the real estate guys get down in the weeds about the real estate, but they forget about macro. And so let's say you go out and buy $100,000 property and it goes up in nominal price by 5% per year. And you say, well, wow, I'm getting rich. Well, not if we've got 10% inflation, you're not, because now in real terms, you're losing 5% per year compounded. So you take that out, let's say 8 years at a 5% real loss, even though at a 5% nominal gain. And now the value of that home and purchasing power has been cut in half. And so that's what why
A lot
I
of people
say,
don't pay attention to those details, though. They just look well past them because they fall for the marketing crap, right? Like, oh, you're richer than you think. Just go and borrow, and we'll throw you in this thing, and you'll be wealthy in a few years. And most people don't understand like the deep dynamics. Like there's a red pill with money. There's red pill in relationship. Like it's basically the uncomfortable truth about stuff that's peeled back behind the surface. People are
yeah, but
very surface
I,
oriented, man.
yeah, but I think you hit the nail on the head there. And if you, I know that that's kind of a blanket term, red pill, and it gets way overused, but the concept is the same. Is that we, whether it's with relationships, men and women, we've been lied to for a long time. The way that they tell you the world works is not the way it works in reality. And it's the exact same thing with economics and investing. The way you were told it works, that's completely irrelevant. You're whistling by the graveyard, so to speak. And if you want to take that economic or investing red pill, you're going to go through the same process as you went through by taking the red pill and looking at the opposite sex and relationships. It's going to be a struggle because of how you've been conditioned to view the world. And we've been conditioned to view wealth as currency units, as pieces of paper. And that is completely inaccurate. Just ask Venezuelans how wealthy they are. Because if you look at their nominal wealth, they're the wealth, every single person's a trillionaire. But of course they're dirt poor.
But in a currency that has no value.
That's right. That's right. So and once people start going down that path, then they start to see how things truly are. And then that, like being red pilled in anything else, is kind of like having a sixth sense, and it's a huge edge, massive edge.